Welcome to Your Math Explained, where we make math simple and clear. My name is Julian, and this is the first video of a new series called Reaching Critical Math. Every weekend, I'll be working through two interesting math problems, sometimes from contests, sometimes from class-style questions, and sometimes just ones that make you think a little differently. The focus here isn't just on getting the answer, it's about how we get there. I'll talk through my reasoning as I solve, pointing out what I notice, what I try, and even what doesn't work right away. The format won't be as organized as the lessons, but that's how developing ideas start. It's always a little bit messy. Each week, we'll do two problems, one for grade 9-10 students, and another for grade 11 and 12 students. At the end of the video, you'll find the problems for next week. If you need a moment to read through the question, please pause the video and resume play when you're ready to begin. Let's get into it. In this problem, we're being told that there are 500 students at a sports day camp. They need to pick between two sports, soccer and basketball for the morning, and hockey and frisbee for the afternoon. So we have a few bullet points here to work through. The first bullet point is telling us that 32% of the students chose basketball. So right away, that's telling me to take 0.32 and multiply that by the 500 students overall, and that gives me 160 students. And this will represent the number of students that play basketball. Because there are 500 students altogether, and in the morning they can only choose between basketball and soccer, we also know that 500 minus the 160 will give us the remaining students, which is 340 enrolled in soccer. So that's from the first bullet point. That's the information that we can obtain. The next one says 1/5 of the students who chose hockey also chose basketball. That's one that's a little bit harder to navigate through because it's starting to have different interactions between the sports, and we don't have a good visual for that. Furthermore, the third bullet point says of the students that chose basketball, we know that 50 more chose frisbee than hockey. So because of these unique interactions, we're going to want something to summarize all of these relationships between the sports, and I think a table is a pretty good choice here. So we'll set up a table where we can see the interactions between the morning sports and the afternoon sports. We'll put hockey and frisbee on the side. We will put the morning sports, soccer and basketball, at the top. Now, you'll notice that we have 160 basketball players, but of those 160, we don't know how many are playing hockey or frisbee. So we actually need an extra column and row so that we can include the numbers 160 and 340 in our table. That is going to be the total number of students enrolled in each sport. So what we already know is that there are 160 basketball players and 340 soccer players for a total of 500 students altogether. That would be my summary table from the first bullet point. And now I think I've set myself up for some calculations to update my table as I find more info. I'm drawn to the third bullet point right now, where they tell me there are 50 more students that chose frisbee than hockey within the people that chose basketball. So what that tells me right now is that I can set up an equation. If we know that f plus h, so I'm using lowercase f and lowercase h here to represent these two spots, they add up to 160 students. So I'll have f plus h equals to 160. Alternatively, I also know that 50 more chose frisbee than hockey. So that tells me f minus 50 is equal to h. So I've got a system of equations. So I can take the second equation and substitute it into the first one, which will give me f plus f minus 50 equals 160. Doing some algebra here will give us 2f minus 50 equals 160. So 2f is equal to 210, and then f is equal to 105. And that also tells us that H is 105. Take away the 50, which is 55. So I can put the new numbers into our second column. That'll be 55 and 105. Finally, using our last bullet point, the one that we haven't used yet, we are being told that 1/5 of the students who chose hockey also chose basketball. That's telling us that this entire row of hockey players, 55 here represents 1/5 of the students, which means the total is 5/5. And we can find that number by taking 55 times 5. That'll make 275 students overall. Now, if there are 275 students playing hockey, we can take away the 55 that chose basketball and find that there are 220 students that chose soccer. And that makes our job a little bit easier to find the last two cells. We can see that 220 plus something should add up to the 340 at the bottom. So we'll get 120 there, and then 120 plus the 105 will give us a total of 225 here. In this problem, they're asking us for the percentage of students who chose both soccer and frisbee. That is corresponding to this cell right here, which means we can find the percentage by taking 120 divided by 500 and then multiply that by 100. That'll give us 24% as our answer. This one is for our grade 11 and 12 students. If you haven't read the question yet, please pause the video. If you have, let's jump into it. What we're being told here is that we need to find the number of students in this class and how many projects are in the class. And I think the most important information in this problem right now is going to be this line right here, where each student in the class has to put a sticky note on each of their classmates' projects. That helps me identify a pattern. One way to break down a difficult problem is to think about smaller numbers. Imagine if there was a class with 5 students and you were one of those students. You would need to put 4 sticky notes on your classmates' projects. Each student would actually have to do 4 sticky notes for each project. Therefore, the total number of sticky notes is 5 times 4, which is 20. We can repeat the same idea here with 8 students. Well, if you're doing 8 students, then that means there's going to be 7 sticky notes that you have to give out, and that means the total would be 8 times 7 stickies, which is 56 altogether. Now, we could do this guess and check method all the way up to the total number of sticky notes that we want, but that's not very efficient. We would try to set up an equation to do this, and we can do that pretty easily. If we have a variable, let's say n, be the number of students, then we know that there are going to be n minus 1 sticky notes, because it's always 1 less, as we've seen in the last 2 examples, right? 5 turned into 4, 8 turned into 7. And then to find the total number of sticky notes, we would multiply these two things. So the equation that would be generated is n times n minus 1 equals, and the total number of sticky notes is 308 plus 198, so that works out to 506. This is a quadratic equation, so we would distribute and move everything over to one side, and we solve our quadratics by factoring. This factors into n minus 23, n plus 22, which tells us that n is equal to 23 or negative 22, but we can't have negative 22 students, so there are only 23 students available. So that answers the first part of the problem. Second part is how many of their projects were in the library. Well, we know that there were 198 stickies in the library, And we also know that if there are 23 students, that means each project had 22 stickies per project. So when we divide these two numbers, that'll give us how many projects there are, and that tells us we have 9 projects in the library. That wraps up this week's problems. The goal of this playlist is really to help you think through math, to slow down and identify the key parts of a question before jumping into the solution. If you want to keep practicing that kind of problem solving, check out the problems I've posted for next week's video. Remember, problem D is for our grade 9 and 10 students, and problem E is for our grade 11 and 12 students. Try them on your own first and see how you'd approach them. And as always, if you found this helpful, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
That's it for this video. If you found it helpful, remember to hit that like and subscribe. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, make sure to drop it in the comments.